the show today, I am so excited and humbled to be chatting with Rich Cebada. Rich Cebada is the owner and creative director of Bodega Body and host of the new The Fight for Our Health podcast, where he uncovers the social justice issues surrounding physical and mental health. Born and raised in the Bronx, Rich struggled with health and fitness throughout his life until his brother dared him to get into tuxedo shape. Since then, Rich has experienced a journey of self-love and self-discovery, losing 130 pounds in the process, and is a leading advocate fighting the barriers to health, fitness, and mental wellness. Rich, I'm so excited we're finally able to chat today, and Happy New Year to you.
Happy New Year to you, Shad. What an intro. Thank you for that, my friend. I'm excited to be on.
Yeah, no, I'm so excited, so humbled to be speaking with you. So before we go ahead and get started, for the audience's context, I met Rich through a creatives and fellow podcasters community called Matchmaker. And, you kind of scroll through these different podcasters' profiles, and I read about Rich's health and fitness transformational journey. And I was completely astonished and taken aback, more so at the fact of how much more this journey has become. I'm not taking anything away from the physical and the weight loss aspect of the journey, but really what it's shaped and transformed into becoming with Bodega Body has been super, super intriguing for me, because I think the health and fitness industry for the longest period has really pushed these ideals of, calorie counting, nutritional restrictions, physical aesthetic, whereas you have really reshaped those ideals and look towards, finding the balance between mental health and physical health, which I think is the topic of mental health in relation to physical health has been really downplayed for so many years. And I'm so glad that it's kind of come up to, conversations nowadays and is being spoken on a little bit more. And also, even on top of that, all the different social issues you're working towards with Bodega Body when it comes to food justice, when it comes to education, when it comes to social and racial injustice, with the various foundations you're working with Harlem Grow, Mona Foundation, Color of Change. It's just such a wonderful journey that you've gone on, and how that kind of ties back to your own upbringing and childhood. It's just been absolutely amazing, and I'm so glad there's individuals like you in the world that are really reshaping the idea of what does it mean to live a balanced and healthy lifestyle. And so today I'm really excited to be speaking with you to learn more about your journey, more on your take when it comes to balancing mental health with physical health when it comes to fitness and nutrition. So before we go ahead and dive on in, I'd love it if, I know I definitely glossed over a lot of the details when it comes to this journey. I'd love it if you can kind of walk us through that moment when your brother asked you, hey, you want to get into tuxedo shape, and kind of how, your own mental health played into that journey and how it does continue to this day.
Yeah, well, thank you, man. I sometimes think about the last 3-4 years of my life. I'm 27, going on 28 later this year. And I think back to about 3 years ago around this time, almost 4 years ago around this time, when I was watching a professional wrestling match with my brother. We were watching like their WWE's WrestleMania event because his son is really into that stuff, and we grew up watching it. So like the once a year we get together around this event. It's kind of like our little mini Super Bowl. And I remember at this point in my life I was around 334 pounds, which is kind of a big boy. I was watching the show with him, and there was a bigger, bulkier dude that popped up on the TV, and I was like, oh, I can do what that guy does. He's kind of this like rounder, punchier guy, and he's in there moving around. And my brother, who was always a lovable jokester with me, kind of turns and looks at me, and he gives you that look that, for those of you who have brothers, know that is like, are you kidding me? Like, are you like you can't do anything that guy can do? And I took it a little personally, and I was like, well, what if I wanted to do that? And I think for context, I was always kind of a headstrong person and a very driven person, and and to this day I still am, and I always sort of looked at challenges as something that I sort of took on head on. And I never took this like weight loss thing or this health thing as a challenge before up until that sort of moment. At the same time, I was sort of going through this deep depression on the inside. And, I think that one, the comment from my brother hurt, and not in the way that my brother intended, but it hurt because it's like, all right, like this is the one thing in life I haven't figured out. And this is the one thing in life that I haven't necessarily took the time or the energy to address. And I had broken up a couple months before that with an ex-girlfriend that I thought I was going to marry one day. And I was broke because I was in a crappy entry level job where I wasn't making a lot of money. I wasn't making strides in my career. My mom had just moved down to North Carolina from New York. And so my childhood home had just went away. And so there was all this like weird transformative things that were happening in my life. And it felt like the weight of the world was on top of me all the time, on top of the weight that I was carrying myself. And I also took that challenge from my brother as an opportunity to say, well, it's time that I look inward and address this for myself, not only to address like the weight loss stuff and the challenge stuff, but because I was looking for an opportunity to feel better. And I was looking for an opportunity to have an outlet that was a productive outlet to address the negative feelings that were constantly coming up in life. And exercise ended up becoming that. And exercise ended up becoming that outlet for me. But I always say, and to this day, I still feel like the weight loss stuff was a great side effect to the mental journey that I was on that entire time.
Yeah, yeah. I think, even myself, going through kind of a physical transformational journey, it's really, like you were mentioning, that side effect. It's really more so the mental kind of values it instills in you, the just being able to really tune into some of your deepest, darkest rooted issues that you really want to tackle. And fitness is an outlet for that. It doesn't necessarily solve it altogether, but it provides kind of a jumping pad for you. And, I'm so glad that you were able to, go through that experience and be able to kind of really tap into those kind of darker moments in your life where you were able to kind of start to shed light on, what was the life that you wanted? What was the type of lifestyle you wanted for yourself? And so I'm curious when it comes to health and fitness, as you were going through that process and that journey, there's often these ideals, especially the idea of what masculinity means, motivation, discipline, no pain, no gain. All of these ideals are really floated and thrown around when it comes to health and fitness. What have you found yourself doing to manage those types of ideals when it comes to masculinity, but also being able to find that balance, find that ideal equilibrium for yourself, so that way it doesn't necessarily suck you back into those darker moments that you initially were at when it came to first starting out on this transformational journey?
Yeah, that's a really great question, because I think that I think it's pretty normal to fall into some of the stereotypical tropes that come into this space. And I'll fully admit that like I there were times where I look back and I think, well, maybe you were focusing too much on like weightlifting too heavy, and were probably lifting heavier than you should have because of an ego thing. And there are sort of like little moments like that where I have to stop and think to myself, like, all right, am I doing this because I think I can do this? Am I doing this because this is what my body needs? Or am I doing this because I feel like I have something to prove? And the having something to prove is something that's tricky, because I always say, well, you have nothing to prove to anybody except for yourself.
Yep.
But when your mind is filled with all of these outside pressures and all of these outside thoughts, even proving something to yourself can be influenced by all these worldly pressures. So it's a pretty sort of complex puzzle to try to figure out. And I think that being honest with myself is probably the best thing that I could have done. I talk about right before all this COVID quarantine stuff started happening, I was keeping a really, really stricted, like regimented diet where I was like macro counting all the time. And I was probably in the best shape of my life right before. And I'm still in pretty okay shape, but before gyms had closed for 6 months, I was pretty good. But I'll say that like I was probably really miserable because I was eating so strict all of the time. And I was like counting every single ounce of whatever I was eating. So there's even still moments today where I like have to ask myself like, all right, why am I doing this? Is this making me happy? And it's a continuous journey, right? It's not something that sort of you stop one relationship with macro counting. Well, then it's something else that you're thinking about. Then there's something else that it's sort of this like constant loop of constantly checking with yourself to make sure that you're doing it for the right reason.
Right. Yeah, I think I've gone through that same vicious cycle myself where you're just counting like macros or you're weighing every single little minute, item of food that you're putting into a meal, where in reality, you just feel so restricted. A couple of months go by and like you were mentioning, you're like, oh, I'm in the best shape of my life. I feel so great. But then you start looking around 2 months in, you're like, man, do I want to eat that again? Do I really want to count this? Like you see all your friends and everyone else, or they're just having such a great time, and you just start to go back into that hole, that mental hole. It's like, why did I even do this from the first place? Like, what was the real purpose of this? And you start to really just getting into this mental clout. You just don't understand what is the purpose of it all. So I'm curious when you kind of went back into that kind of rabbit hole of a dark mental place, like what were some practices? I know you mentioned being accountable with yourself, but what are some other practices, and even to this very day, that you incorporate and that you think others who are going through a health and fitness transformational journey, they should incorporate to ensure that they keep that balance in their life as well as just align to the health values that they want to abide by?
Yeah. I think that one of the things that I try to do is I actually try to like take a complete step back from it all, and do something completely different physically. So most of my physical routine has to do a lot with weightlifting. I own a stationary bike that I have at home, and that's also a big part of my practice. But sometimes I actually like to just do something like yoga, and do something that one is good for the body, but also allows me to kind of like channel everything out and try to, tune out sort of all of the noise that is around me. And I'll say that even in the physical exercise portion, I still devote that time for looking for mental clarity. Like there's plenty of times during the week where, something's not going right at work, or something's happening in the news cycle, something, my mom said upset me, something that, my girlfriend said upset me, my dog pooped on the floor or something. And I try to find those opportunities to say, all right, well, how can I take all of those little frustrations from the week and channel that into something that's going to feel better for me, right? So I'll go on my phone and like curate a new playlist for me to use at the gym or whatever. And that's like okay, I'm channeling this energy towards something productive, even though it's something silly like making a playlist, that I am taking that sort of moment and the opportunity to say, well, no, this song is going to hit really hard right at that moment where I want it to, during a physical practice.
Got it. Yeah, music is such a great outlet for when it comes to, the fitness and kind of health space, because it can really, I think it's like you were mentioning, the energetic kind of vibes that music is able to kind of inspire into you when you're going through those lull periods when it comes to managing physical exercise or your nutrition. So music is definitely a really great outlet. I'm curious, kind of taking it back to like your childhood, now kind of coming full circle.
Yeah.
I know oftentimes there are individuals who grow up in, impoverished communities that don't
Yeah.
have the access to, proper nutrition or even the
Yeah.
proper educational resources towards building and developing a strong mental foundation. So, what have you been able to do with Bodega Body? I'd love it if you can touch on that, because that's such a, starting from the ground up with
Yeah.
children is super important in our day and age. So I'd love it if you can kind of share some of that experience.
Yeah, I think what's funny is that Bodega Body started off as kind of this concept that I was coming up in my mind, where I was like, all right, when I was losing weight, I actually didn't have a lot of money, again, because I was broke. All I had was my gym membership, which was relatively affordable. And beyond that, I had to figure out, all right, with my extremely limited budget, how can I figure out a way to eat healthy? And for those of you who are listening who aren't familiar with what a bodega is a corner store in New York City. It's a like Puerto Rican heritage and history. It's like a word for warehouse, and you can find anything in a bodega, from toilet paper to a can of soda. There's usually a deli counter with a dude selling bacon, egg, and cheeses. It is the lifeblood of urban communities in New York City, and other parts of the country call them something else. But the idea behind Bodega Body, for me, when I started off with it, was, all right, how am I going to get my information and my knowledge out there around getting fit on a bodega budget, and being able to do so sort of affordably? And so I had started blogging for a little over a year, and slowly I started to realize that there's a lot of information out there on the internet. There's a lot of disinformation out there on the internet. And looking at myself and my credentials, I realized, all right, I'm not a nutritionist. I'm not a doctor. Even though I have great tips and great information to share with people, there's probably more qualified people than me to be able to have these conversations. What I also realized is that I had done radio in college for 3 years or so. And I was like, all right, let's start a podcast. And so earlier this summer, I had started the Bodega Body podcast. I did 25 episodes where I was talking to people about their journeys to physical and mental health. And from that, I sort of rebranded my website into sort of an apparel line where I sell, t-shirts, shorts, hoodies, with 50% of the profit going to these organizations that are fighting the issues that I see as barriers to physical and mental health. Because I think what you start to realize, the more of this work that you do, is that knowledge isn't the only barrier. In fact, it's probably the last barrier for a lot of people. And when you have to, when your community is flooded because of climate change, you're not necessarily going to be focused on your physical or your mental health, because there's all this crazy stuff happening, right? If you live in a community with no access to great fresh food, you're not going to be worried about it, because you're just worried about, what's the cheapest thing I can afford, and what's the best thing I'm going to do to put that food on the table. When you have to worry about potentially getting mistaken for a criminal and getting shot by a police officer, that's another barrier to health. And so there's all of these things surrounding it that have to be fought towards. And thinking about the things that I'm good at, thinking about the things that I enjoy doing, I figured, all right, how can I sell these t-shirts? And now how can I do this new podcast that I'm going to be doing, The Fight for Our Health, in order to talk about all of these things that get in the way for people? Because I think the common thing that you hear is like, well, maybe that person's not working hard enough. But when you realize that there's a lot of layers that don't allow that person to work hard enough, the issues become a whole lot more complicated.
Right. Right. So it's really being able to peel back the layers to the onion of that individual's circumstances. And yeah, it's unfortunate where individuals just think that from that surface level perspective, and where it's really, yes, your background, kind of the communities that you're growing up in, how society structures kind of people's cultural backgrounds and how they're limited as a result when it comes to resources, or just how they have to grow up. And there's so many other issues like health and fitness are kind of, unfortunately, not the biggest worries that they have on their mind. Is really surviving to just see the next day, see the next month, provide for their families, which is something that, I hope that going forward, the country can really resolve and fix in all of these different impoverished communities around the nation. And I know with Bodega Body, you're doing such tremendous work towards, tackling these issues. And, one of the things I love that it didn't really necessarily come to mind when I first thought of it is when you sell all of your apparel, you mentioned this, I believe you call it a size tax or a fat tax, where, corporations are selling apparel when, if you're, say, a bigger individual, that you have to pay extra because you're, quote unquote, causing these corporations to, have to manufacture additional materials. Whereas you are like, nope, doesn't matter what size, what shape, you are still a human being. You are still an individual. We treat you all equally and just the same. So it's the same price across the board, which I absolutely love.
Yeah, man. Listen, as someone who had to buy triple XLs for a very long time, I always found myself incredibly annoyed at the fact that I had to pay, $3, $4, $5 more for the same, crappy T-shirt design that I was getting at the time. So yeah, it's that I think something that I also tried to be a little bit conscious of is the fact that I label all of the apparel on the website as unisex. I have a couple of friends who are gender non-binary, and realizing that sometimes for some folks out there that the shopping experience might be sort of limiting. So there's plenty of unisex items, right? Like nothing makes something a men's t-shirt or a woman's t-shirt. That's what we decide. And it's kind of a weird thing to like loop your mind through, that if you're used to society being structured a certain way. But I think that, a t-shirt's a t-shirt, and I want whoever wants to wear it, however they want to identify, wear a t-shirt. You know what I mean?
Yeah, no, definitely. It's weird how we place all these labels, and I know we're going off on a completely different tangent to the actual topic of mental health and fitness, but I think this is such a relevant topic that really ties into, when you buy apparel, like apparel does factor into, health and fitness. There's always these different types of apparel that are out there for, specifically fitness geared activities. And then, when it comes to, oh, I got to buy, this tank top, this shirt, these sweats. Why am I paying extra just because I'm, quote unquote, a bigger individual? I want to experience this transformational journey that so many others have, before me and that will after me. So what is the discriminative factor there that's present? So I love that you do that with Bodega Body. And, I think we're going to go off on too much of a tangent if I keep going on and on with this. And I would love to kind of have you on another episode to kind of speak on those issues. But before I go ahead and I guess end off this episode, I have a final segment on each of my episodes with guests that I call the 3 keys to relationships. So this is a segment where I ask guests 3 questions to kind of gauge their own insights when it comes to relationship management. And these questions apply to any and all relationships. So with friends, family, romantic partners, business partners, whatever type of relationship. So, and these aren't like quick fire short answers. I'd love to hear you elaborate. So, and I'm curious to see what your insights are on these. So the first question I have is, what's your number 1 relationship red flag?
I think when someone isn't willing to let another person speak, and this is something either in a personal relationship or even a business relationship, when you have someone who constantly has to put their voice first or have to have their voice finish last, or dominate an entire conversation, that's a big red flag to me, because it means that that person only thinks that their opinion is the only one that matters. And I think that, obviously in personal relationships, but especially in the business world, I work in marketing full time. And I'll say that when you're sitting in a boardroom, and you have one person trying to dominate the entire conversation, it gets a little bit annoying, and you realize that a lot of the ideas that get put forward aren't necessarily in the best interest of the company. They aren't in the best interest of profit. They're not in the best interest of people. They're not in the best interest, because you just get one perspective and one voice. So that's the big red flag for me.
Yeah, definitely. So the second question I have is kind of a converse to that. What's the most underrated relationship quality in your opinion?
I think it's not underrated, but I think it's one that isn't sort of used enough, and it's sort of compromise. It's kind of related to the other one, but I think that when you are not necessarily looking at things from a sort of sacrifice perspective, but when you're willing to say, I'm willing to take a little bit less in this moment, or willing to maybe not fight that fight, that you really start to build a stronger relationship, because it shows that you care about what the other person thinks and cares about. And that you realize that you're not always the right person in the room or in the situation. It works all the time in my relationship with my girlfriend. It works all the time. And listen, there's some times where I'm just like, all right, I'm not going to pick that fight with you, and we're gonna have Chinese for dinner and not barbecue, right? So, but I think that it's about being a genuinely thoughtful person, and about genuinely caring about what that other person in that relationship wants and thinks and feels.
Yeah, I love these answers, to the previous and this question, just being able to open your mind, but at the same time be able to not be willing to understand when it is your turn to speak and when it is your turn just to listen, and just let things kind of, go with the flow, and not try and, bubble up an issue or a situation that doesn't need to really bubble up as a result. And so,
listen, I'm not perfect, right? Like, there's times where my girlfriend says, "Hey, you're not listening to me." I'm like, "Oh, my bad." Mm-hmm. Like, I will listen now. She will remind me.
Yeah, I think it's great when you can have those kind of relationships and those partners who can kind of call you out. It's like, I'm working on this myself, but I also know that I'm not perfect. But in the midst of the moment, you're like, I think I'm getting closer to perfection. Then you get that instant reminder. You got to step back, take a step back, take a step back. So those are the relationships that are really great to have, when you can have that self accountability with the partner. So I love that you have that, and that banter, I'm sure, is a lot of fun when that you go back and forth on that. And so the third and final question I have is, what would you say is, if you don't have one, is your own mantra or slogan for relationship management? And so I can give a little bit of context. So this podcast, which I'm just about to release very soon, it centers itself around the idea that we don't make relationships, but we make relationships better. So I'm curious if you had a slogan or mantra for how you approach relationships. What would that kind of look like?
Yeah, I think the mantra, I'm going to borrow from actually a pro wrestler. And it's actually how I thought about my fitness journey too. And it's redesign, rebuild, reclaim. Mm-hmm. And it's all about when you have to, even when things are down in the dumps, there is always an opportunity to rethink and reshape how you approach things. And the old saying goes, the definition of insanity is doing something over and over, the same thing over and over, and expecting a different result every time. Well, if you don't take the opportunities to readdress things in your life and rethink about how you tackle things, you're going to keep hitting the big barriers, whether that be in health, whether that be in business, right? Like the year we just had in 2020, there's a lot of businesses right now out there that have to rethink about how they approach business. There are a lot of people who have to rethink how they approach their health. People who are just locked up for 5 months with their spouses have to figure out how can we reapproach this relationship. And taking that and always, if something's not working, try something new, and being willing to do that in order to reclaim what, you deserve and what'll make everyone happy.
I love that. I love that. Being able to always see kind of the opportunity rather than the roadblock that's there in front of you. I think that's such a great way to lead your life with. And it just really opens up so many doorways. Like for instance, for myself, like that was something that was such a huge groundbreaking revelation for me, that it always takes a lot of time for some people. Some people get it right away. Some people it takes more time, but just being able to see the opportunities. And then I think in turn, be able to share that with others and being able to let them find the opportunities in their life as well. So, Rich, you're doing such phenomenal work with Bodega Body, and, the opportunities that you found through your health and fitness journey, and just overall finding balance a healthy balance in your life is now just opening up doorways for others to find the opportunity for that balance in their life. So, this has been such a great conversation. I'm so excited to see what you continue to do with Bodega Body, and, the re-release of your podcast. I know you're releasing it very soon as well. So everyone, you should go check out Rich's podcast when it releases again. When can they expect to see that podcast re-release?
Actually, this month, in the next couple of weeks, I am going to be putting out the first new episode. That one's going to be a solo, kind of just talking about my journey a little bit. But the archive of the old podcast is actually still up there. So if you look up The Fight for Our Health on any major and minor podcasting platform, we're everywhere from, Pandora to Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Stitcher, sort of everywhere. But in the meantime, everyone could go follow me at Rich Cebada on Twitter and Instagram. That's Rich, Cebada.
Yep. And I will definitely be linking all of those, social media profiles in the show notes as well. So Rich, this has been such an enriching conversation. So
I see what you did there.
Yeah, I'm so glad we had this opportunity, and I would love to. I know we kind of touched on it, going on off on the tangent towards the end of the conversation, but I'd love to go into some other social pressing issues that you and Bodega Body are really fighting for. So thanks so much, Rich, for this awesome and wonderful conversation.
Absolutely. Shad, thank you so much, man. It's been a pleasure, and it's been an honor to be on here. And, I wish you nothing but luck with this new venture of yours, man. There's going to be some cool conversations coming out of your creative mind.
Hey, everyone. My name is Shadman Rahman, and thanks for tuning in to my YouTube channel today. I hope you found this episode of the Between Us podcast enjoyable, and that you're walking away feeling entertained, inspired, and/or motivated. If you particularly enjoyed this episode, please go ahead and smash the like button down below and leave your thoughts in the comments section. And if you'd like to go ahead and keep up with the podcast, go ahead and follow our social media. And please go ahead and subscribe to the channel and turn on the notification bell, so that way you can find out about new episodes as soon as they're released. Until next time, everyone, take care, and we'll see you all in the next episode.